Hello, everybody, and welcome back. If you are new here, my name is Douglas Johnson. I am a certified yoga teacher at the advanced 500-hour level. I am also an ordained minister and a kirtan artist, musician, amongst other things. And today, I wanted to talk a little bit about judgment. Before I do, however, I do want to thank the community that makes these talks possible. There is a group on a site called Patreon. They are my patrons, and they contribute financially every month so that I can take the time and resources and energy to create these humble talks and put them up on YouTube free of charge, so that hopefully anyone who can benefit can access the talk without a paywall. If you'd like to join that community, become a part of that community, if you feel called to do so, then check out the links below. There's some easy ways that you can contribute if you're interested. All right, so today I want to talk about a little about judgment. And this is an important topic from my perspective. And a lot of this perspective is shaped by A Course in Miracles, which, as many of you know, is a really influential text in my experience. But Zen, one of my favorite Zen teachers, Muso Soseki or Muso Kokushi, he also talks quite a bit about judgment. So this is not exclusive to Christianity, to A Course in Miracles, or anything like that. This is, I think, a universal truth. Some traditions will emphasize certain things more than others. That's just the way that they work. Certain teachers will emphasize certain concepts more than others. I think a lot of this depends on who their audience is, what social environment they're teaching in, and other factors. So just because a teacher or tradition doesn't perhaps talk about judgment, it might just be because that was not an issue for the population that they were dealing with. There was perhaps other things that were blocking truth from their awareness. So I want to start this talk by asking you, have you ever felt unworthy? Have you ever felt like you hate yourself? Have you ever felt like you weren't good enough? I think if you're human, you've probably experienced these things. And the idea I want to share with you today is that really the only way we can feel unworthy, the only way we can hate ourselves, the only way that we don't feel good enough is if we actually believe that we know who and what we are. And in my experience, one of the things that occurs with a deep spiritual awakening, and again, a deep spiritual awakening does not have to happen all at once. For most people that I have seen, work with, and talked to, spiritual awakening is more of a process. It might have a particular start point, and you may have I don't know what the right word is, events that happen. Perhaps you go on a retreat and you have an insight, or perhaps you're in a yoga class and you have a moment, or you're meditating. So these can happen as well, but they also may not happen. Some people can develop a lot of awakeness, awareness, without these things happening. So please don't assume that if they're not happening to you, that that means something is wrong or that you're not awake. So one of the insights that can come as we really wake up as awareness is we don't really know what anything is. Now, I'm not talking in a practical, day-to-day sense. Sometimes people take these statements a little too far, and then they start trying to walk around in their daily life as if they don't know what anything is, or, you know, let's say all these kinds of things. There's a practical level in which we operate on a day-to-day basis where, in a sense, I know what my shoes are, I know what they're for, okay, in one sense. But in a grander sense, I really don't know. I don't even know what I am. I don't really know what a human being is. You can throw a bunch of labels at me. Well, a human being is a ape. It's a Homo sapiens. It's a mammal. But again, I can throw back at you, well, what is an ape? Oh, an ape is a mammal that has this and that characteristic. Okay, well, what's a mammal? Oh, a mammal is an animal with mammary glands and doesn't lay eggs. Okay, what's an animal? Oh, well, an animal is this, we just go and keep regressing backward until we end up with, we don't know what anything is. Now, this might seem like a pointless exercise or silly exercise, but actually I think it's quite valuable. And this is what my foundation in Western philosophy gave me, is this deep questioning into the nature of reality and what we really can and can't know. And when you do that, you really realize you can't know very much beyond a shadow of a doubt. Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." I don't even know that you can know that. So this is really, when we get down to brass tacks, we don't really know what's going on here. Again, maybe we're actually in a matrix, like Neo in that film by the same name. We don't really know that anything is what we perceive it to be. And as human beings, we've been taught, and we assign value and judgment to things based on what we think is happening, and that includes ourselves. So if I grew up with parents who were very demanding and they thought I wasn't perhaps reaching my full potential for whatever reason, then they might have been very, very critical and keep telling me, you can do better, you're not doing good enough, you know, whatever it might be. And because I was young and innocent, I may have believed them. Because they're older, right? They've been around longer. It seems like they know what they're talking about. When we grow up, we might realize, well, my parents are just people. And maybe they weren't even very enlightened people. Maybe they weren't even good people. They're just our parents. Now, this isn't to say that our parents are evil or bad or lacking, but they just may not have had the tools or the upbringing or the exposure to concepts that would allow them to really figure out what is and isn't going on. And so they were raised in a certain way with certain values, and they didn't question it. They just paid it forward, in a sense. My parent told me eating with your mouth open is bad, so I'm going to tell you, because now I'm the parent. I'm going to tell you eating with your mouth open is bad. Is it really bad? I don't know. I guess it depends who you ask. How important is it? Is it worth slapping your child, hitting your child, shaming your child, making them feel guilty? I don't know. And I mean that. I really don't know. I maybe have my own opinion. I maybe know what I would do in such an instance, but again, I can't know beyond a shadow of a doubt. And that's kind of the point of today's talk. As human beings, we really don't know much of anything. And the main thing we don't know is we don't know what we don't know. So we may have figured out a few little things based on experience. And this is what all human knowing really is we use the scientific method or similar tools to test the reality in which we live. And if we can begin to predict outcomes if I do this, then that happens. Then we begin to think that we know or we understand. Okay, and again, there's a usefulness to this. There's a utility to it. I'm not saying that there's no point in doing that or there's no value in doing that. But this is ultimately a spiritual channel. So the pragmatic use of that is not really where we want to be focused in spirituality. Spirituality is about that which transcends the mundane, okay? And so when we're looking in that respect, through that lens, we really don't know who and what we are. And I'd say the less deep you've gone inward, then the less you actually know your true self, basically speaking. So you might think you're this body. This is, I'd say, the most common mistake that human beings make. Some humans may not really identify with their body very much. They might identify with their mind. They might say, well, I'm not anything to look at, but boy, am I funny. I'm not anything to look at, but boy, am I smart. Look at this doctorate paper that I wrote. Boy, I may not be that attractive, but man, am I talented. Listen to this song that I wrote. Look at me play the piano. Again, what we're really looking at are things that are forms. They are temporal. They are temporary at best. And what spirituality wants us to look at is that which is eternal. And so again, I can judge my worth based on these types of things. And we can go further than that. So again, we can say, well, I don't identify with my body, but I identify with what I can do, my talent, my intellect. And then some people identify with emotions. Others identify with memories, right? Well, I did this, I did that, I remember this, I remember that. And what deep spirituality, I think, of any stripe that I've encountered, you know, I'm not saying I've encountered everything, but I've certainly encountered a lot. And basically any teaching that I've encountered won't agree that any of these things define you. And that includes usually Western philosophy as well. We run into in Western philosophy what's called the problem of identity. Okay, so again, if you think, oh, well, that's some silly Eastern thing. Well, actually, Western philosophers came across the same problem, that how do we define a self? What's a self? So we don't really know what we are. If we think we're a body, again, this teaching tells us we're not. If we think we're our job, our accomplishments, again, no, you're not. If we think I'm my good or bad deeds, no. Okay? So again, this is pretty radical for most of us. So if I'm understanding this, then this idea that I hate myself or I'm not good enough, you begin to see where it starts to fall apart, because what is the I that's not good enough? If I'm not this body, then, you know, even if this body is really ugly, or it doesn't work right, or something else is unpleasant about this body, well, if I'm not this body, then what is there to hate? Same with my intellect. Same with my memories, my emotions, my accomplishments. If none of these things define me, then how does it make any sense to say, I hate myself, or I'm not good enough? What does that really mean? It doesn't really mean anything, because what is the I that you're pointing to when you say, I am not good enough? Now, again, this is another talk that I'll say is a rather advanced concept and talk. If you're new to spirituality and to non-duality and these types of concepts, then this may be way over your head. And that's okay. You can hang around and listen if you want. You might not understand all this, but perhaps it'll be useful at some point. Who knows? I like to think that if you're listening, there's probably a reason that you are. There's a reason. Somehow this will turn out to be useful for you. So, judgment, if we look at A Course in Miracles, it talks quite a bit about letting go of judgment, relinquishing judgment. The fact that we actually cannot judge. And it says that really we have two teachers, and I've talked about this in another talk. We have two teachers, the ego and spirit. And so ego is the one that, if we're listening to that voice, then we are going to see lack. We're going to see injustice. We're going to see problems. And that's just because we're tuning into a certain way of looking at things. It's not ultimate truth. It's not ultimate reality. But we're choosing to look at the world in a certain way. And I'd say most of us in this world, this is our default. So unless you have been trained spiritually, or maybe you have a very auspicious birth, or maybe you had really enlightened parents, maybe they weren't even spiritual, but they just were really committed to truth, and they taught you how to cut through and see the truth, well then, you may already have that perspective. But most of us, without some training, without somebody pointing this out to us, we will simply accept the senses, the information of our senses, and other people's judgment or interpretation of what the senses are telling us. Okay, so just because I see something, it does not mean my interpretation of that is true. So again, just because I see injustice does not mean that injustice is actually happening. Just because I see beauty or something I desire, it does not mean that it's actually good for me to have that particular thing. So my interpretation of what my senses are feeding me does not align with ultimate truth or ultimate reality. We all will have our own sort of distortions and things. So back to A Course in Miracles, in that it spends a lot of time, again, pointing out that if you're judging, if you're seeing a world full of sin, full of lack, full of problems, then you're listening to the ego. And that's not a problem, except that you're going to suffer as a result. It's not trying to make you feel ashamed or guilty or like, oh, you're a sinner, you're doing it wrong. It's really like, if you want lasting peace and joy, you will have to give up listening to the ego and the judgments that it makes. It says you have another teacher, which is called Spirit or Holy Spirit. And Spirit reinterprets the way we normally see things and gives us a different interpretation. However, generally we have to invite Spirit to do that. After a while, it can become a habit, and we don't have to consciously do it so much. But at least at first, it can be really, really challenging to stop, pause, and to invite Spirit to give us another way to see what we're seeing. And again, the only reason to do this is that we want peace and happiness. Sometimes people think that they're like doing somebody a favor, right? They think that their sibling did something wrong to them and they're like really pissed off. And they're like, well, I want to be spiritual, so I'm going to forgive that jerk for what they did to me. They don't deserve it, but because I'm the better person, I'm going to forgive them. Well, my understanding of Course in Miracles is this isn't true forgiveness. You basically saw sin and then forgave the sin. My understanding of what A Course is inviting us to do is to realize there was no sin. That the whole thing was confusion, okay? So it's a different kind of forgiveness. It's basically saying that forgiveness in this sense is realizing that there's nothing to forgive, that we were mistaken in our interpretation of reality, okay? Now again, I get it. This is a really advanced and difficult concept for many people because we are raised to believe and to think that we're seeing reality as it is. Well, that's just the truth, Doug. My sibling was a jerk. They were unfair. They really did hurt me, whatever it is. Okay. So Byron Katie has a really good teaching that I like that plugs in right here. And she asks, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And she's basically asking the person, do you want to listen to the ego and be right? Because the ego is telling you, hey, this is true. And it has all the evidence you need. Okay, I'm not questioning that. You can point out this, that, and the other thing, and it has all the evidence you need. Nothing is lacking. So it's really a choice. And it's a difficult choice because you're used to siding with the ego, chances are. So it seems like you're going against truth. It feels that way. It feels like you're denying truth. But what you do is you set aside the ego's interpretation, okay, because you want to be happy. At least I hope so. If you're listening to this channel, I hope that you want to be happy more than you want to be right. If you want to be right, then you can stop the video right now, because being right, proving the ego right, it's just not going to lead us to happiness. It can't. It just doesn't. So we set that aside and then we invite the Holy Spirit or Spirit to give us another way to see events. And if we do that, if we create space, then we will have another way of viewing the events. And we may realize that things are not so black and white as we had once thought. So I'm sharing this with you because what A Course in Miracles eventually gets to is the fact that if you want to hold on to your judgment of others, you will not be able to stop judging yourself. And this comes back to our main topic, which is this sort of self-hatred that so many of us have and we want to get rid of so desperately. We want to get rid of it. We want to feel worthy. We want to feel like we're enough, good enough, right? That we're worthy of love, that we're worthy of just, I don't know, being okay. You know, we want other people to tell us we're okay. The funny thing is, if in your heart you don't feel okay, it doesn't matter who tells you, you're not going to believe it. All right? It really doesn't matter. Somebody can come along and tell you, you know what, you're great, you're okay, you're wonderful. And maybe for a moment you'll feel loved, you'll feel accepted, and then the next moment it'll be gone and you'll be chasing again more of that from outside of yourself. And so how do you get rid of that? I hate myself, I'm not good enough, all these kinds of things. Well, again, that's coming from the same place that the judgments of others is coming from, what we will call the ego. Now, last week I talked about how the ego doesn't really exist, and that's an important concept, I think, so I do recommend you go back and watch that. But the ego's funny because as long as we haven't seen that it doesn't exist, it exists. And so for most of the people listening to this talk, chances are you experience the ego. And so for you, it's very real. So it is helpful and useful for me to point out what's going on. Once you've seen through the ego, that's a different matter altogether. But as long as it's a real concept for you, as long as you're experiencing what I'm talking about, judgment of others, judgment of self, self-hatred, oh, they should have, they shouldn't have, you're seeing sin, right, around you, in yourself and in others. What the Course says is generally we project sin outward. So again, our judgment of others actually is judgment of ourselves. We have so much guilt and we have so much self-loathing. It's too painful to see it here. And so it gets projected outward. However, what I found is people generally, as they get closer and closer to awakening, it maybe stops working. I think someone who's really unconscious, they may succeed in believing that all the evil, all the sin, all the depravity is out there. But my experience with people who work with me is generally that's starting to crumble, at least to some degree. And they begin to see that maybe they aren't who they would like to be. And a lot of times this wall comes crumbling down when one starts meditating and when one gets humbled by the process of meditation. Because what you might find is the forms that make up what you called yourself, so body, mind, heart, again, actions like previous actions or the actions that you take on a regular basis. A lot of us, again, we define ourselves, accomplishments, we take these things in a weird way, we turn it into a self, this idea that there's a thing that we are, and it's made up of all of these things or some of these things or parts of these things. And so as we begin to introspect, we go inward, then we might start to see that, oh, all these good things that I tell myself that I am, I also have these other things that I do that I don't like. Now, I've seen this many times when people start meditating. At first, it seems like meditation is going to cure everything. It's a really amazing thing. Like there's so much transformation that you might begin thinking, oh, wow, like I can just change anything about myself. I can just clean up everything. If I don't like something, it'll go away, it'll stop if I just meditate enough. And usually what happens is after, I don't know, it might be 6 months, it might be a year, it might be a few years, you might begin to see that, well, I've noticed this really nasty habit that I have. And yeah, it doesn't seem to be going away. Maybe it's a desire for something and you'd rather it go away. And you're meditating, and it doesn't seem to go away. And you're thinking, well, I don't think that thing is very spiritual. I don't think that thing is very awake. I want it to go away. I'm a yogi and a meditator, and I want to be spiritual, and I want to be awake. And this particular desire or particular action, whatever it is, I don't think it matches with who I want to be. And you find that it doesn't go away. Now, maybe you can repress it. I think a lot of people in spirituality have done that in the past. I don't really recommend repression because I think the negative effects of repression are worse than actually whatever it is that you're repressing. Now, not repressing something doesn't necessarily mean you act on every impulse. That's not what I'm saying. But consciously being aware of what our impulses are is very important. So repression is where we basically block it from our view. So again, this creates an interesting situation for us where we're meditating, we're starting to see our inner life really clearly, and then we might start to see something that perhaps we don't like, we don't approve of. Now, this is an interesting thing because who is it who's judging? In my experience, and that's all I can really share with you, in my experience, Spirit, God, they love you. They love you. They love you in a way that you can't even imagine being loved. Their acceptance of you and understanding of who and what you really are goes far beyond your limited understanding. So the thing that's sitting there and saying, I need to get rid of this ugly quality, this unspiritual quality within myself, this unloving quality, this whatever it is, it's actually still just the ego. Again, the ego starts to take over the job and say, oh, I know what needs to happen. We need to get rid of this. We need to get rid of that. We need to wear robes. We need to have beads. We need to use certain spiritual terms and words. All of these, we need to eat certain foods. Ego has a whole plan, right, of fixing you, because the ego's whole premise is that you're not good enough. Something wrong with you. We can call it original sin. We can call it karma, past karma, whatever it is. This idea, something's wrong with me, and I'm going to use spirituality to fix it. Well, in my experience, you can't. You can try. You can try, and many people do. I'd say more people following a spiritual path are trying to fix themselves, trying to fix what's wrong with them, where the Holy Spirit, God, they don't see a problem. They look at you and they just feel love. They just love you. And they know you in a way you don't know yourself yet. So again, this idea of I want to fix or change myself and then I can't. For me, from my perspective as a teacher, it's a very good step because it's humbling. And what a meditator might learn through that experience is, oh, when I look out at other people and I judge them for their annoying habits and their rude behavior and all their problems, I always think, well, can't they just stop that? Can't they just change that? Why don't they just be more the way that I want them to be? It's an interesting experience when you look at yourself, like without the shielding of the ego, right? Without the ego's ability to puff up your chest and tell you how great you are and tell you how you don't do bad things, other people do bad things, you do good things. Well, when you strip that away and you see very clearly, and you might see again a habit that you'd rather be rid of, and you see you are powerless to change it, it's very humbling. And then you look out at other people, and in my experience, you're not so judging of them. You realize that change is difficult. It's hard. And just because we want to change, it doesn't mean that we'll be able to. So again, even, people who are irritating us or we're judging, they may not want to change. A lot of times people don't. And from my perspective, who am I to say they should change? But let's say that they even want to change. It does not mean they will be able to. As a spiritual teacher, I see this all the time. I see people who would love to change, who would love to come to yoga more often, who would love to be able to meditate every day, who would love to stop judging, whatever it might be. And they find that that is a difficult thing to do. All right? And so, again, very, very humbling. And I think that's a good thing. I think being humbled, realizing how little we're actually in control of, in terms of our ego judging, saying, hey, this needs to change, and then we can't change it. So that can help us soften the judgment. And again, from my reading of A Course in Miracles, what it's really saying is that until we give up judgment of others, we will not be able to stop judging ourselves. Because again, if we really get down to non-dual brass tacks, there's no self and there's no other. So how can I, the true self, not the little ego self, that's the funny thing, is the ego self, the small self, the illusory self, the self that isn't really there, that one thinks I can judge others and I can be free of judgment. And in fact, judging others raises me up. That's a lot of times the way that it's seeing it. That if I can tear them down, then relatively speaking, I am going up, right? So if I all of a sudden made everybody shorter than me, then all of a sudden I'd be the tallest person in the room. Okay, same concept here. If everyone else is a sinner and depraved and not good enough, then all of a sudden I'm better than them. Maybe I still have my faults, but boy, am I doing really good. I'm a lot better than them, right? So it's a trick. It doesn't work. And you're welcome to try. Go for it. You know, judge the world. Tell everyone what they're doing wrong. And I think what you'll find is your suffering increases. Maybe not on a conscious level, maybe not on a physical level, like you might have great accomplishments, you might be doing a lot, this and that, but inwardly there will be a black hole. There will be a pain so deep and so dark that you are terrified to look at that. And sometimes that can show up in the form of an unwillingness to be still and silent and feel and go inside. So very often it shows up as busyness, that we become very, very busy, because having time to feel and be still and experience peace is terrifying to us, because as that happens, we become aware of that which isn't peace, right? That comes kind of to the forefront. And then that's usually what we're trying to avoid. All right, everyone. So I hope today's talk was helpful as usual. If you do want to help me in the community, then if you're on YouTube, give a thumbs up, comment, subscribe, share with others. And if you'd like to go a little above and beyond that and become a part of the community that actually helps make these videos by making a financial contribution, please check out my Patreon page, which will be linked below. If there's any way I can help, please reach out, let me know, and I'll see what I can do. Otherwise, until next time, namaste, and have a beautiful, beautiful day.